All right.
I'd first like to welcome the students who've joined us for this evening's conversation. Tonight, Reid Buzby, class of 19, who's a software engineer with Stripe. He's going to talk a little bit about his pathway from campus to career, but spend the majority of the time talking about things that maybe students need to know, experiences maybe they need to pick up, in addition to their classroom learnings, to best position them for the working world as a software engineer. So welcome students and welcome Reid.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to chat.
So a little background, Reid is an experienced software engineer with a focus on in the back end and infrastructure engineering across a variety of companies, from early stage companies, startups to big tech. Reid previously joined a startup as the first employee, where he helped build the foundational product and software infrastructure while helping the team grow from 4 to 50 people. He currently works at Stripe, where he's building compute infrastructure to power Stripe's most critical workloads and thousands of services. For those of you who don't know, Stripe is a financial services software company that powers the online payments industry. Stripe processes online transactions for companies like Amazon, DoorDash, Lyft, Uber, OpenAI, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, Reid, why don't we begin with you just kind of talking a little bit about what your role is at Stripe. You know, what's kind of the day in the life of for you?
Sure. Yeah, so I work on a infrastructure team at Stripe. The way engineering is split up at Stripe, there is sort of a product engineering organization and a infrastructure engineering organization, where the product engineers focus mainly on building software that users of Stripe interact with. So when you think of Stripe, like all the payment processing related features and sort of software is built by the product engineering org, and then the infrastructure engineering org builds all of the software infrastructure that the product teams utilize. So product focuses on making the product better, infrastructure focuses on the infrastructure backing the product. And so I work on the compute infrastructure at the company. So we provide all of the compute for all of the product teams at Stripe. So about 95% of Stripe's compute is running on infrastructure that my team manages. And under the hood, it's mainly all Kubernetes based. So we're operating Kubernetes for the whole company. If you don't know what Kubernetes is, it's sort of the canonical platform that large tech companies and small tech companies utilize to run containerized applications in the cloud. And so my day-to-day is sort of building platforms on top of Kubernetes that allow other engineers at Stripe to easily use our compute platform. So in the sort of users of my team is other engineers at Stripe. So I'm building things for other engineers rather than for end users of Stripe.
Okay. I'm just curious, given how you've kind of laid out a bifurcated software engineering world, product versus the infrastructure. Any thoughts you would have in terms of what tends to have, from an individual perspective, gravitate towards infrastructure versus folks that might gravitate towards product?
Yeah, I think so. Like the other functions within infrastructure are typically like database related stuff, networking stuff, um, like async processing, like Kafka sort of stuff. Uh, all of the like very much like back-end heavy like distributed systems sort of problems. So if you're, I don't know, I think people that are like more interested in that stuff and like are more interested in the hard like computer sciencey problems like scaling problems, like how do you scale load and stuff like that, typically tend to gravitate towards infrastructure, whereas people that like to work more on um, like front end development or things that are like the people that care more about like building software that people actually use or like that is like driving value or sort of provides some sort of use case for a person outside of the company, will tend to gravitate towards more product stuff. But there's definitely overlap in both domains, and you can do well in sort of both domains pretty easily. But those are sort of the focuses of each.
Okay. So let's spend a little bit of time having you share with the students those things that you think they need to spend some time on and get experience with and learn outside of the classroom. So in addition to their coursework, those things that they need to expose themselves to and do that would be helpful in terms of bolstering their credentials or their attractiveness to organizations as a software engineer.
Sure. Yeah, I think like in from my experience at Middlebury, the sort of s- like coursework that you do in class is a bit different than what you sort of experience in the industry, in that a lot of the time in a computer science class, you're given a problem set or an assignment, where you need to like write some code and like solve some problems. And you write the code on your laptop and like you run it once on your laptop and like you see that it passes whatever tests or sort of completes the goal of the problem set. And then you upload whatever you've written and you submit it, and sort of that's the end of it. Um, which is a good way to learn how to code. Um, but it is a bit uh, it's not super reflective of how things work in at like a real company, in that the software that you write is used by, millions of people potentially, and is like not running on your laptop. It's running on a server somewhere. And you're not the only one writing the code. There's like hundreds or thousands of other engineers that are contributing alongside with you on the code. And there's a bunch of other code that you have to interact with that is written by other people and not just you. And so I think that uh, the most experience you can, or like the more experience you can get, sort of writing code that is used by other people and like trying to build things that other people use, that are like maybe somebody in your family or your classmates or your friends, and like they can go actually use whatever you've built, and it is not just like working from your laptop and your laptop alone. Um, I think that is super useful to like understanding what software engineering outside of the classroom really looks like. And I know there is a class at Middlebury, that I took at least, called software development, that really tries to simulate sort of this experience, of collaborating with other people on code, and using things like GitHub, and like actually deploying your code to some server in the cloud and having it run there, and all of that. So I would highly recommend taking that course. If you haven't, maybe it's a requirement these days. I think it was not a requirement when I was at Middlebury, but yeah, I would do that and try to like simulate experiences like that as much as possible. like building things on your own that are actually used by other people. Like you can build some little side project or app that I don't know, solves some like random little problem that you have. And maybe five people would be interested in using it, but you sort of go through the whole experience of having to write software and then have it running in a place where other people can actually use it.
So, um, one of the things that we talk about with students in terms of how they will be evaluated in the process, the hiring process, we talk about really three areas, dimensions, competencies, academic coursework, projects that you've done, internship experiences if you've had them. So
Hmm.
more around that skill and experience side of things. The second dimension being motivation. Why do you want to be a software engineer? Why do you want to be a software engineer with us? Whatever the organization is that you're pursuing.
Yeah.
And then, excuse me, and then the last dimension is fit. Since organizations are different, what is it about the organization's working environment and beliefs and behaviors and all that sort of stuff? And can you see yourself being successful in that environment? And can they see you being successful in the environment that they're familiar with?
Yeah.
Um, is that reasonable, those three areas, or would you add anything to that?
Um, the one thing I think I would add is there's also a lot of sort of soft skills involved in the job. And a lot of the times the biggest differentiators between a really good engineer and an average engineer is how they deal with sort of soft skills like communication and teamwork and um, like how you approach a problem that is out of the ordinary, sort of those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've always felt that Middlebury does a really good job of teaching people how to do stuff like that. And so uh, I think like that dimension specifically gives Middlebury students a leg up on maybe other like hard engineering schools that are purely teaching, you're purely learning sort of software engineering courses, and maybe you have a better technical background than somebody from a liberal arts education, but some of the sort of soft skills might not have been translated as well as somebody from a liberal arts education. So I always think that's a super important part of the education that I got out of Middlebury is, um, yeah, approaching the non-technical stuff well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I might include that in the competencies portion because it is, as it turns out, like most jobs out in the world, it's multidimensional in terms of the individual. And so you have to have the technical and the non-technical side covered. But good, I appreciate that input. But let's talk a little bit about the actual interview and hiring process. So we've touched on things that students can do in addition to their coursework. You mentioned projects and actually coding in projects where people are actually using what it is that you've coded. Um, what other sort of prep work do you think students need to focus on as they're fixing to get ready to actually get into the recruiting processes?
Yeah, yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and I don't I don't necessarily like this about the software engineering industry, but um, the majority of interview processes are going to revolve around sort of leet code style problem solving,
Mm-hmm.
um, which are problems that are not super reflective of what you actually do in the job. It's very infrequently that you actually encounter, you know, a similar situation on the job that like one of these questions is describing. So they're very much sort of trick question-y kind of things. And yeah, they're I don't know. They just like if you're good at these sort of questions, you're not necessarily going to be good at the job, and vice versa. If you're not good at these questions, you're not necessarily going to be bad at the job. But it is sort of a fact of the interview process, and um, they do a good enough job of weeding out people that can handle those types of problems or like that can handle the problems that you see on the job because they somewhat translate to sort of a leak code style problem. Um, and I was always not very good at these in like school and um, even like a few years ago. And I don't know, I'd sort of like had never enjoyed them, always thought it was kind of stupid that this was a fact of the interview process, but I think like you sort of have to accept it as a fact and like try to get good at it regardless. And so when I was looking for my current job, I spent uh, quite a bit of time getting good at leak code. Um, and I think for me, the best way for me to prepare for these kinds of interviews was um, one, like get a good baseline understanding of the concepts. There's been, tens of textbooks written about sort of leak code questions. Cracking the coding interview is one of the most famous ones. But there are also like lots of online courses that will teach you how to get good at these if you're more of the person that enjoys like watching a video or like a lecture online to sort of learn about this stuff rather than reading from a textbook. I know that was more helpful for me, was sort of taking more online courses. So that's the one thing is like having a good baseline knowledge and being able to sort of apply those learnings to a few practice questions. But what really I think helped push me over the edge and like get really good at these was practicing real interviews as much as possible rather than practicing them on your own and yeah, there's just like less pressure and all of that. So there's a website I think it's called pramp.com, PRAAMP. I think that's what it is, but I can send it to you, Jeff, afterwards. But they let you do mock interviews with another person that is like trying to get a software engineering role. So you like sign up for a time that you'd like to take an interview, and they match you with some other person that is also doing the same thing. And then you interview them, and then they interview you, and then you give each other feedback at the end. And so, you're paired with a random person, so like sometimes it's not sort of the most helpful thing. But the majority of the time, the other people are like also good and like do a good job of interviewing you and stuff. Um, and that was like the most helpful thing for me in that I could take as many of these interviews as I wanted to on my own time and could schedule them whenever I wanted. And so I did probably 30 of those just to get like really familiar with sort of the feeling of being in an interview and like solving a problem quickly and dealing with all of the sort of lead code uh, intricacies. So that was super helpful for me. And additionally, I think another tactic that you can do to get good at these interviews is you can interview at companies that you're maybe not super excited about joining or don't, you wouldn't necessarily see yourself working there. Um, and you can, you should be respectful to the people that are interviewing you and everything, but you can really use those interviews as practice, um, as well, because they're even more real than the sort of peer interview. And you still have all the same nerves of going through the interview, and you sort of see what kinds of questions, um, people are asking at the moment, in the industry. And so that's another thing that's super helpful. I know in my latest job search, I did this, and one of the first companies I interviewed with that I didn't necessarily want to work for, but they asked me a question, that I didn't do very well on. And then, in my interview for the company where I currently work, I got the exact same question. And so I uh, was able to do much better, and because I had sort of done that practice one, weeks prior. So, yeah, those are sort of the techniques I would use.
Okay. Yeah, I've in speaking with other alums, one idea that one of them had shared with me was, using something like Glassdoor in your research around a particular company that you may be interviewing with to see what sort of questions others have reported they've been
Mhm.
asking, problems. And if you do that over a number, as you're suggesting, if you do it over a number of organizations, a few, you begin to see a pattern in terms of the types of things that they may be asking. And those are the ones that you want to spend your time practicing, as opposed to the entire universe of possibility, trying to guess what they might be doing, versus trying to skinny it down to the few targeted in prep. The other thing that perhaps uh, you weren't aware of, but we do at Middlebury is we do recruit alums to do practice interviews with technical
Mhm.
interviews with students over the summer, where you can get a number of reps in with someone who is on the other side. And I have heard the comment from a number of alums in different organizations that, yeah, elite code is kind of the thing in terms of what they tend to use. So not terribly creative across the industry, but in any event, knowing those things I think can be helpful for students as they prepare. Um, I'm going to underscore something you said, and that is practice. Practicing is something you have to anticipate spending some time on, in addition to all that coursework you're doing, in addition to whatever projects you may be doing, in addition to whatever type of internship you may have during the summer. You want to continue to get better at these technical interviews just so it doesn't become an obstacle, recognizing that it isn't the only measure going forward. Anything else you would say in preparing for the interview process, aside from preparing for technical interviews, that you would say students should be spending some cycles on?
Um, yeah. Outside of the technical preparation, um, typically, like, people are going to also ask, like, you'll typically have one other interview where, it's non-technical, and you're talking, more about, your sort of experience, what kind of things you like to work on, sort of the type of person you are. So again, some more on the soft skill side of things. And if you're just coming out of college, it's harder to sort of speak on experience. Maybe you've had an internship or two. Um, but I think, like, focusing on sort of things that you've done, in the past, that sort of prove your credibility. And if you don't have an internship, or you don't have any, like, projects outside of school that you've worked on, it's sometimes, it might be hard to pass that interview, given you'd have to mostly speak about your, um, coursework, during that time. So I think, uh, doing sort of side projects can both help improve your technical skills and help you do better on sort of those kinds of interviews, talking about your experience, because you can say, I built this like project on my own, and like these are the problems that I ran into, and this is how I solved them. And it speaks both to like your ability to solve problems, but also your ability to like go above and beyond. Like you're not just doing the coursework that's assigned to you, like you're doing even more on the side. You know, it shows interest in the industry, and um, yeah, so I think it can really help those kinds of interviews, having more projects on the side. Um, Anything else I can think of? Yeah, no, I think it's just like practicing interviews as much as possible, like actually taking interviews that simulate the real thing as much as possible
Right.
is the best preparation, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, just to say it, the interview process is more than just technical. So, yep, you got to be able to demonstrate your technical competencies, but then to your point, there's more to the working world than just the technical side. And so those behavioral interviews, where they're really trying to understand who you are and how you think and what's important to you, is where they're sussing out the motivational pieces and the fit with the organization. So you definitely want to be prepared for that as well. Um, One thing I'm curious about, we've spoken in other interviews with alums who are with large enterprises, and you've had experience with startups. And so I'm just curious from your perspective in terms of looking for, if I were a student who were interested in getting into the startup universe as a first job, what does that feel like? How do you go about finding something like that?
Yeah, it's definitely more difficult because there's so many startups now that it's like hard to find, like which one's the right one, and all of that. There is a website called AngelList, or I think they changed their name, but it used to be called AngelList.
Mhm.
But it's sort of like a LinkedIn job board for startups specifically. Um, so that's a good place to look. Y Combinator has a job posting as well. Y Combinator is um, a famous startup incubator in San Francisco that has produced companies like Airbnb, and Stripe, and others. So they have lots of startups sort of in their incubator at any given point in time, and they'll post jobs for all of the companies that they're working with on their website. So that's another good place to look. Um, so yeah, those are kind of the two main things. I think yeah, it's difficult to find the right startup. A lot of times you have to rely on your network sort of to have connections into some companies. But um, the one thing I will say about sort of startup versus big tech out of school is oftentimes the interview process for a startup is much easier than it is for a big tech company where you have to solve, 4 or 5 leak code problems, and, go through a whole full day on site and everything. And there's hundreds or thousands of other applicants that you have to beat out to get the job. Um, Often at a startup, there are less applicants, so there's less competition, and they don't have enough time to sort of do a rigorous interview process, and so it's often shorter, and more sort of personable. Like, would I be excited to work with this person, and will they be able to, uh, deal with lots of um, random stuff thrown their way, more than like, can this person solve a leak code problem? Um, and so I think like if you, I don't know, if you don't have like the good internship on your resume or like any side projects or anything, um, often like looking at startups can be a great way to get in to the industry. And you will often learn much more at a startup than you would at a Google or an Amazon, because your domain is much wider, because there's very little people. You have to work on many different things. Again, you'll if you work hard, more you'll be given larger projects that have more impact on the company, than you would at a big tech company. And so in my opinion, like I think it's super helpful for anybody trying to get like way, way better at being a software engineer. You can go to a startup and learn kind of at 3 or 4x the speed that you would at a large tech company. So that's what I did with my career is started in startups and um, learned a ton, and I'm now at a big tech company. Um, and but sort of always itching to get back to startups because the pace of execution is so much faster and the breadth of work is larger. And um, so yeah, that's what I'll say about
Yep.
startup hiring.
Okay. Yep. And again, a number of alums that we've engaged with have gone in both directions multiple times, right? Started in a startup, moved over to a big organization, then moved into a smaller organization, and then back into a big. So, I mean, the good news is that there is that flexibility. It isn't a one-way type of entry point,
Yep,
or wherever you start is where you're going to end up. We know that's not true, right? So,
definitely.
okay. Well, I think I want to offer it up for any questions that folks might have at this point. And I would just say, if you want to ask a question, go ahead and turn your camera on and ask away. Somebody, anybody. All
Hi,
right,
can
we
you
have
hear
a
me?
taker. Hey.
Hi, so my name is Alex. So just really thank you so much for your time. Really, there's only one person here, but you're still interviewing, so gotta really appreciate that. I'm quite curious about how you would go about learning the very specialized skills. So you said that you're working in Kubernetes, sorry, and these are very niche things, or any things in the cloud. I think that big tech companies tend to use them, but in the software development class that I'm taking right now, and I think you took it as well, the one you recommended earlier, we work in React. So we basically do things that are very basic, very high level. So essentially, would you recommend learning all these niche skills like cloud architecture or networking or anything that they don't teach us here? Or is it not necessary and you learn it on the job?
Yeah, good question. I think uh, I think it depends on what you want to do after school. I think like for me, I joined a startup after school as my first job, and I was sort of forced to learn these things because uh, we had to use them, and there were very few other people on the team, and so uh, you had to learn how to use all these technologies. And so if you're like sort of going that route, you can like it is definitely super helpful to like have some knowledge going in. But you can also learn on the job as you go, like I did. Um, if you're going to a larger tech company, most of the sort of niche technology stuff is going to be managed by a team like the one that I work on at Stripe, where sort of we manage all of Kubernetes for the whole company, and so um, most everyone else at the company doesn't need to have any knowledge of Kubernetes because they can like rely on my team. So I think like it depends sort of what you want to do, but it definitely never hurts to have this knowledge. And it can set you apart for sure, if you sort of know how things work in like at a real job as opposed to just sort of knowing how to write React or whatever. And so it can definitely set you apart. And um, yeah, it's like it's interesting stuff to learn too, in my opinion. So um, yeah, and things like Kubernetes are pretty much used at every company, every tech company in the world. And so it's maybe not as niche as you think in that there is every company is kind of using it. So um, yeah, again, it's like it's definitely not going to hurt you if you know it, and it's stuff that I sort of wished that there were classes on at Middlebury, because they do go sort of deeper into how software works at a like in the cloud and at a real company, as opposed to more of the sort of academic learnings. So I think it's valuable to learn. Yeah.
Mhm. And if you don't know these things and you apply to a job that really uses them, will it be will it be a big factor in the interview process and the selection process, do you think?
It definitely depends on like the job that you're interviewing for. I think um, typically if you see a job posting and they expect you to have a background in a certain technology on the job posting, then it's like probably going to be a factor. But even then, it's like maybe not the biggest thing because there were certainly people on the team that like learned those technologies on the job. So I think it's like if there's no like main technologies that are required on the job posting, then it's not a factor. But if they do sort of require that you have some knowledge in a certain technology, that obviously helps. But I think it's still not the end of the world. Like if you can prove that you're able to learn things quickly and can like learn the technology on the job, I think people are like far more interested in the person that is good at that than the person that is like good at one or two technologies but like can't learn another one, right?
So to be flexible, to learn how to learn essentially.
Definitely. Yeah. I think uh one of the biggest parts of being a software engineer is just like having to learn things quickly. So if you can demonstrate your ability to do that, then the technologies that you know don't really matter.
Okay. About the process for getting in, when would deadlines be for applying? Because I know they tend to move them earlier, year by year. So I heard somewhere that it's in this fall for junior internships. I'm a sophomore right now, so for 2026 internships, it would be around the fall. But you definitely know more than me in this sector. So when do you when do you know that deadline's open or applications open?
Yeah. I think like typically for big tech companies, yeah, they're looking to um, have all of their summer interns sort of in this like early spring or so of the year. And so at least at Stripe, they mostly are interviewing in sort of winter and early spring for summer internships. Um, but I'm sure it's different at every company. Um, and I'm pretty sure there are like websites out there that track this sort of stuff, and they'll like post the internships for like all of the big tech companies in one place. So I'm sure if you did like a quick Google search, you could find something that like aggregates all of them and tells you when you need to apply by and all of that. So yeah, I think that information is definitely somewhere. Um, but I would say like if you're I don't know, if you're late to the party or whatever, you don't get a like big tech internship um by the spring or like in the winter or whatever. Um Again, like smaller companies are gonna have like vastly different processes and might be hiring their summer intern in June uh to start in July or to start like 2 weeks later. So um if like the window passes and you don't have the like fancy big tech internship, there are plenty of other options that are just as good.
Okay. What are some companies that you know are really, hiring, and maybe companies that are growing? You said it earlier that in San Francisco there are many AI companies booming. So are there any sectors that you think are hot right now and would be easier to find an internship?
Yeah, definitely AI is hiring the most right now. Um, Specifically, AI startups are hiring extremely fast. Um, so yeah, like hiring in sort of big tech has slowed in the past couple years, and there's definitely like less job postings and more competition, so it's even harder. But in AI right now, like people are hiring like crazy. Um, and so like that's like where I would look for sure. But yeah, like my company is hiring lots of people right now. Stripe, we're looking to hire, I think, 2,000 people just this year. So there's lots of open roles at Stripe.
Hmm. Now, when you got these jobs, did you go on just apply, or did you talk a lot with alums or people at the company?
Yeah, so it was funny in my latest job search, I did do a ton of networking. Like reaching out to everybody that I knew and even like one of the strategies that I did a lot was if I found a company that I was interested in and found a role that I liked, just go on LinkedIn and see if there is anyone from Middlebury that worked there. Even if I didn't know them, often like if you reach out to fellow Middlem and you say I went to Middlebury or I would go to Middlebury now, those people like my response rate was like 98% probably, just reaching out to random people that went to Middlebury. And so that is super helpful, just like trying to reach out to anybody that you can at a company can definitely give you an in. Referrals are a thing. They're super valuable and good ways to get your foot in the door. So definitely use your network as much as you can. Use LinkedIn aggressively. I think it's a super useful tool to get a job. Um, but yeah, I did like all this networking, and the job that I actually ended up getting was the one that I didn't know anybody at and just applied cold to. So, uh, it's funny how that works out, but generally, I would say that's not a highly successful strategy, and doing as much networking as you can is going to improve your chances.
Is
Any
this
other?
still effective? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to ask if this is, because the thing is, middle alums are very sparse. Like the startup companies usually don't have any. The big tech usually have some, right? But
Hmm.
if you don't have any alums, how would you approach that?
Yeah, good question. Often, like you can just try reaching out to people at the company. You don't have to know them, don't have to have any like mutual connections with them. And most of the time they're not going to respond to you, but sometimes they do. And like it just takes one person to respond to you, and like now your foot's in the door, and you can like get an interview with that company. And so um like yeah, I certainly wouldn't be discouraged if you don't know anybody that works at the company. If you're like persistent and uh reach out to people and um put a good application together that highlights your skills and how they relate to the job posting. And yeah, I think like especially at startups, people are uh going to respond more often than not. Like people at startups are just looking for ambitious, hardworking people. And so if you show that you're like ambitious and you're like reaching out to them constantly and following up and everything, like they'll be super excited to work with you.
I
Okay.
think I just want to add a couple of comments to the conversation. Alex, you might be shocked at how many middle-ums are in tech companies. There are a ton, it turns out. And you might be shocked at the number of senior executives in Amazon and Google and Apple and, right, that are middle-ums. Parker Harris, co-founder of Salesforce. Wow. So I mean, there are many. So I just want to disabuse you of the notion that there aren't many mid kids in the tech universe. There are a ton. And just to echo Reid's comments, think about networking as concentric circles. So the innermost circle are the people that you know best. Personal network, family, friends of family, family of friends, classmates, parents, things like that. You want to make sure that you use that network. And the next concentric circle out is the Middlebury Professional Network. And so you can use LinkedIn, or you can use Mid2Med, the platform. You can use members of the tech career community on the Mid platform to reach out. Next concentric circle is, as Reid's suggesting, is anybody that works at the target organization. Your challenge, your trick, is to establish an affinity with that person. So what is it about that person that you can glean that establishes a connection as you're reaching out to them, so that they're more likely to be willing to help? I think at the end of the day, what I've heard from Reid are a couple of things. One is make sure you're prepared for interviews, so that's the technical and non-technical side in practice. And then the second piece being the networking. Because there's nothing more frustrating than to fire off a bunch of applications and then hear nothing back, versus I'm sending my applications to a person and human eyeballs are actually going to see my application. I'm going to talk to someone. Those tend to be much more successful approaches as you kind of go forward. I think we probably have, if you have another question, Alex, we got time for one more.
So you mentioned an affinity and building an affinity with people, even if they're not middle-ums, for example. What would be an affinity? What would you call a common fact or a common trait?
Um, I mean, like one like simple thing that I can think of is like somebody who went to another NESCAC school. I often get people from all the NESCACs that reach out to me and say, hey, I noticed you went to Middlebury. Like, I'm also from the NESCAC. I went to Bates or whatever. Like, would love to chat if you have some time. So something like that. Maybe, I don't know, you read, maybe you look at their bio and they grew up in like a town close to where you grew up or something. And you can sort of use that. Or, I don't know, maybe they have some extracurricular thing on their LinkedIn profile or something that you also enjoy doing, and you can sort of reach out and talk about that. That's what I'd say. Just like like little things, like one thing that will improve your chances of getting a response from the person is super helpful. I don't know, Jeff, you have anything you'd add?
No, that's exactly it. Gee, I'm a professional ice climber, and so if someone reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I'm an ice climber too," guess what? I'm probably going to talk to them, right? That's what we mean by affinity. There's some connection, ideally, that causes that person that you're reaching out to be more inclined, to reply. And again, furthest concentric circle out is you got nothing in common other than your interest in their organization or your interest in what they do. Even that's a point of connection. Okay. All right. Ed, one other comment I wanted to make around timing. The tech industry, perhaps more so than other industries, they're fluid. So they will put out positions maybe in the fall, as you were suggesting, with a certain number of hires in mind for their organization. And once that order is filled, they're done, right? And so what that means is don't wait. Don't wait for expiration dates that may be posted. Once you see an opportunity that fits, your areas of interest and organization, you begin to put your application together and get it in. Earlier is better generally. But having said that, they'll keep that order to buy, so to speak, open until it's filled, which means it can roll into the winter, it can roll into the spring. Certainly for larger organizations, it just depends on their particular budgeting process and where they are in terms of filling their need. Okay, so just kind of keep that. It's different than, let's say, finance, which is very regimented in terms of its hiring season, or consulting, very regimented in their hiring seasons, other than everyone's moving earlier, and earlier. So pretty soon they'll be hiring you out of kindergarten before you even get to college. So not unlike professional soccer, where they sign kids at 10 years old, 12 years old to the club. So, okay, well, I'm going to have to bring it to a close for tonight. Reid, I really appreciate you taking the time. Alex, I appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully it was helpful.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Good to do.